Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today we're taking a look at my E39 M5. We're up here in Woburn, Massachusetts at Garage 42, where Craft Detailing, my favorite detailers, have set up shop in their second location. And boy, was that convenient, because this is where my M5 lives. If you're new to the channel, you probably don't even know I own this car. I've had it for about 8 years. I haven't really driven it for 2 years. It's been out. I've taken it on short jaunts. I've gone and filled up the gas tank. But honestly, it has not done any real driving since last weekend, where I took it on a 200-mile trip up and back to New Hampshire. You can tell by the bugs that it got a little bit of use, which is very exciting. However, I need to state that this car was in very rough shape, the paint at least. The swirls had swirls, and when Kevin, the owner of Craft Detailing, got a look at this car, he genuinely said, if there was DSS for cars, I would have this put in foster care. You do not deserve it. And he just took the car and they did a multi-stage paint correction, followed by a ceramic coating with OptiCoat Pro Plus. Once you do the OptiCoat Pro Plus, first step, don't get it wet for the first, let's say, hour or so. Second step, do not wash the car for 2 weeks, and it has not yet been 2 weeks. So I basically took the car straight up to New Hampshire after they did it, and we're not at that 2-week mark where we can wash it. So we've got to just kind of let it sit in its own filth while it cures. However, it still looks so much better than it ever did. I'm blown away, because honestly, this was not a car that I ever wanted to be seen at car shows. It didn't really represent me that well, and I felt pretty, I don't know, I just didn't like it. They even managed to get these exhaust tips to look incredible, because those had some brown on it. They're chrome tips, but they did not look good. This has a full stock exhaust. When I bought it 8 years ago, this was a big deal. I was driving a 2003 350Z. This was my second car, okay? This was just added to the garage as like a, hey, I've always wanted one of these and it's time. When I found this car, my friend Chris, who had an E46 M3, still does, he told me, if you don't buy this one, stop looking. It's a single owner car. It had 62,000 miles on the clock when I bought it. It has 79,000 now. It's carbon black, it's black leather, so it's not the most ideal spec. You gotta have that Alpine white if you want the real big money. But it does have the extended leather or full leather. I'm always bad at this. I'm not a big E39 nerd. I don't know every option, but that means we have leather down here, we've got leather on the lower half of the doors, and we have a leather dashboard. So this is something that I am pretty obsessive about keeping out of the sun. And the roof is Alcantara. I don't like it when people touch the roof, because I don't want their slimy, greasy hands getting all over my nice Alcantara. Although right here, it's a little bit of sag. I don't know how to fix that. I know there's just some clips up there, not a big deal. And these rear seats, they do not have the fold-down rear seats. We just have the ski pass. And that's actually more desirable because there's less creaks and squeaks and the noises with that, as well as, I guess, added rigidity. But I mean, who cares at this point? It's a 2001. We're not out here trying to set Nürburgring lap times in it. I've never street parked this car, so I can't really be blamed for the curb rash on these wheels, but they probably need to be refurbished. One of the big problems on the M5 is because the rear camber is so steep. It's a ridiculous spec. The insides of these tires wear so fast. So not only were they very old, they were worn down to the cord. So Continental provided me with this beautiful Continental Extreme Contact Sports. And I'm really psyched about this, because this car deserves a sticky Grand Touring summer tire, not just some all-season. But here's the deal. Now the car looks the part. It's not perfect. Of course, there's rock chips. I didn't repaint the car, but it's beautiful, very up close. And carbon black looks incredible in the sunlight, because you can go from black to blue by just changing your angle of attack on your vision. But it needs some mechanical work. This car is from 2001. Let's take a look under the hood. All of this rubber, all of this is from 2001. It's 20 years old. And in fact, this little overflow tank, yikes, that just is not even connected anymore. And I'm a little ashamed. However, I haven't treated this car poorly. We have done valve cover gaskets, plugs. I've put in a new clutch, because right after I bought the car, the clutch decided it was no longer going to disengage, and something had snapped actually in the clutch assembly. So that was replaced along with the rear main seal, although the rear main seal is leaky. So that's probably my biggest thing to chase down after replacing this cooling system and making sure that it's not going to leave me stranded. Oh, and I also replaced this roundel because the old one had completely faded and gotten disgusting. So thank you to FCP Euro for that. It's always good to have a quick turnaround on shipping times from them, because sometimes you just need to get stuff in a pinch. All right, let's start her up. So it's always nice not to see a check engine light in this car, although it doesn't really matter that much anymore because it's old enough where I can have it inspected with a check engine light. So, you know, cheers to me, even though that was kind of the bane of my existence for a long time, trying to get this thing to run properly. Some nice things about this car. This air conditioning runs like, this is the best air conditioning I've ever owned in a car. I think the E39 M5 is one of those like last of the overbuilt vehicles. So, you know, they only came in a manual 6-speed, thankfully, because this gearbox is phenomenal. Let's go for a little drive. Even though that rear main seal is leaking and likely leaking all over the flywheel and clutch, it never slips. So that's kind of one of those things. It's a little bit out of sight, out of mind, and just make sure that you're putting oil into it. But as they say, leaks never get better. They don't. So I am probably going to have to tear this all out, and we're going to send it down to Wild Motorsport to have a little bit of refurbishment on this car, because I want it to be a good driver. I don't need it to be, I mean, it's never going to be a garage queen. It's never going to be a show car. It's not going to be one of those $200,000 EAG cars that like Zuckerman's out purchasing. Every year I think about selling this car. Every year I think that's the one I don't drive, that's the one I don't need. But every year the M5 becomes cooler in like the social opinion of automotive geeks and nerds. This car just becomes more and more important because everything that keeps coming out is not as cool, is not as good. And for a little while, these kind of cars suffer because it's like, well, it's not that fast anymore, right? 400 horsepower, it's still a quick car, but it's not setting records. You know, when you have a car that was like the fastest sports sedan in the world for a certain time, at some point, it's not. And then that cachet goes away, and it's like, well, then what do you have there? You've just got an old Beamer. The thing about this car is that the way it drives is so distinct. It's so incredibly BMW at its peak. And I think we can confidently say that now, where BMW, I don't want to be that guy who's always like, well, BMW is lame now. But BMW's changed. I don't think they're lame, I just think they're different. And now I recommend BMW SUVs to people. I don't necessarily say, hey, go get yourself an M5 competition. Yes, they're incredibly fast and amazing, but I don't know, man. There's better driving experiences out there, and do you need 600 horsepower? To me, though, that can be very frustrating when you never get the opportunity to actually unleash it. And in a car like this, you can unleash all of its power. Nice, juicy torque in the mid-range. And I don't know if you saw my Aston Martin review recently, lane, eng, merge left. I always do that. I always get in the lane right before it merges. That's okay. We're going to leave plenty of distance. We'll be fine. If you've seen my Aston Martin Vantage GTS review, the 4.7-liter V8 in that car actually shares very similar character with this 5-liter S62. They both are not... They're happy to rev out, they will do it, but all the meat and potatoes is in that like 4,000 to 6,000 RPM. You don't need the other 1,000 RPM. You're good. Like, it's gonna be just fine cranking along in that mid-range. And watch, like, we go into third, there we are, 3,200 RPM, we'll get into it. That's quick. This thing still feels quick in 2021. What more do you need? And that's why when I say like BMW peaked, I feel like this is it. This is peak BMW. The funny thing is there's some obvious shortcomings in this car. The steering, for example, not impressive. Not impressive. While sure, it's plenty tactile and it does the job, and it's not an electric assist. It's not an EPAS system, but it is a recirculating ball system. This is a steering box like a pickup truck. This is not a nice rack and pinion steering rack. And I don't know if anyone, I think people have replaced these steering racks with a rack and pinion, but from what I've understood, it takes a lot of fabrication. Let's get into it a little bit. Oh, so good. The other shortcoming, I think, are the brakes. The brakes are fine. Sure, they're fine. And they'll do the job from like, you know, like 80 back down to reasonable speeds if you saw a cop real quick. The problem is this car is genuinely capable of 180 miles an hour. Like, it'll do it. It'll go 180. And it'll comfortably sit at 140, 150 if you were just going for like a long highway jaunt. That means you really need to be clever about your distances, because these are 2001 technology brakes. They're not amazing. They, like I said, they'll do the job, but they'll do the job as well as a 2001 BMW would do it. Not as well as you're used to in a modern car. Because if you jump in to a new M5 and you hit the brakes, it's almost the most impressive part about the car. Sure, the power's great, but my God, those brakes are something to behold. That brings me to another point of why I haven't sold this car, is because every time I think I'm going to sell it, it's because I haven't driven it in a while, and then I go drive it. Then I go drive it. And I don't need to go drive it hard. I don't need to go become a psychopath on the public roads. I just need to go do a jaunt like this or get it on a highway, and then I quickly am reminded why this is one of the most important cars of a generation, and why I am so fortunate to have bought this car when nobody cared about them. They were cheap. This was under $20,000 for a single owner, 60,000 mile car. You just will not find this. It's not happening again. These cars were like 911s in the sense that they were so cheap that the repair bills looked expensive. So if you had an M5 that you say spent $13,000 on, you were likely not about to go spend 10 grand on a repair on this car to get it up and running. What you would do is you would just Band-Aid fix it or sell it to the next idiot who can maybe deal with it. That's what happened. And so these changed hands over and over and over and over again. All the E39 M5s that you see out there, they've probably have 6, 7, 8 owners, some well over 10. And you can follow that history. You can see what happened. It was like, guy got a deal or was spent just a little too much, couldn't afford to fix it, sells it to the next guy who patchworks it, who sells it to the next guy who patchworks it. And now they've all got incredibly like ugly modifications. They really need to be sorted properly. And now it's going to cost like, you know, 10 or 15 grand to get them legitimately sorted. Whereas this car is completely stock. This even has the stock exhaust. Everyone's telling me you got to make it louder, you got to do this, you got to do that. I don't think so, because I think it's pretty nice to have the stock exhaust on this car. Listen to this. We'll do a second and third. Saw a traction light come on for that. And, you know, it has this dual mass flywheel. I haven't driven this car in a while. I'm not the most smooth with it right now. We'll get there. And it also has a sport button that adjusts the steering weight and the throttle mapping. So sometimes I'm a little wonky with it. Forgive me. I haven't been in the car in a long time. But here's the deal. This thing is incredible. And I'm really thrilled that A, I didn't sell it, and B, I'm putting the time and effort and money into making it look brilliant again. So I've got to say, huge thank you to Craft Detailing for taking it upon themselves to just breathe some life into this car. Now that it looks like this, it absolutely deserves all of the mechanicals, the bushings, the cooling system. Oh, let's get into it. And we're gonna drive this car a bit more. I want to drive this car more. I know it's pissing oil out of this rear main seal. We'll get it down to Wild Motorsport and Walpole, have it sorted, and just see where we can go with it, because I just want to use it. And I think we're in this position now where internal combustion engines are on their way out. They are. We have seen the writing on the wall. We know when certain manufacturers are going to stop building them. And that means that the following step, you know, some years later, is going to be banning them altogether. We're already seeing some cities ban internal combustion engines. We've seen them do it with diesels. It's not long after this that we're going to start them removing petrol cars from the world. And I would rather die having driven this car 200,000-300,000 miles than die thinking, well, I preserved it for the next guy, but there was no next guy, because you can't legally sell it to anyone who can drive it anywhere but a racetrack. So thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive. and I'll see you in the next one. Oh my goodness, this thing is such a rocket. Even today, I can't believe this is a rocket. Oh, gotta go back to Garage 42, get it back in that climate-controlled garage, because I think that's what's keeping this poor thing alive. One of my favorite things about the E39 M5 is that the resources out there are immense. You've got guys like Ryan from E39 Source who have dedicated YouTube channels, dedicated their lives, honestly. His job now is strictly E39 Source, to DIY projects on these cars. Literally every detail, from like a full engine rebuild to how to replace a fog light, has been done on that channel. It's incredible. So, you know, this is a great car if you are mechanically inclined and you just want a solid vehicle that you can drive all the time, and you're not like paranoid about a check engine light. You've got to have a little bit of a stomach for this car, because it doesn't, if you're just somebody who needs it to be perfect all the time and everything needs to run exactly the way you'd like it to run every moment of the day, this is going to be a brutal car for you. It's always going to throw some kind of curveball, not catastrophic, but something. It'll throw you something that you're not going to like.